2 hours, the presenters on every news channel were saying injured but expected to make a full recovery, and I have no idea why, but it made me so angry.
For years, Diana's family stayed largely silent as comparisons between Meghan Markle and Princess Diana dominated headlines around the world.
There are voices in the royal story that the world has learned to expect. Commentators, journalists, former palisades, estranged relatives eager for a moment in the spotlight. But every so often, a voice emerges that stops everyone in their tracks, not because it is loud, but because it has been silent for so long that its arrival carries the weight of everything left unsaid. Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Princess Diana's elder sister, has always been that kind of voice. Quiet, composed, and deliberately removed from the circus that has surrounded her late sister's legacy for nearly 3 decades. Which is precisely why what she has now reportedly said about Meghan Markle is sending ripples through royal circles that nobody quite anticipated, least of all Prince Harry. To understand why this moment matters, you have to understand who Sarah McCorquodale actually is. She is not a fringe figure in Diana's story. She is one of its most important and least examined chapters. Born in 1955, Sarah was the eldest of the Spencer siblings, and in many ways, she was Diana's guide into the world that would ultimately consume her. It was Sarah who first dated Prince Charles before the relationship passed, almost farcically, into history. It was Sarah who watched her younger sister transform from a shy, uncertain teenager into one of the most photographed women who ever lived. And it was Sarah who stood beside Diana's coffin in Westminster Abbey in September 1997 and read aloud the words of a poem while the entire world wept. Since that day, she has served as a trustee of the Diana, Princess of Wales Memorial Fund, and has worked quietly but purposefully to protect her sister's memory from exploitation, misrepresentation, and what she has always regarded as unnecessary public spectacle. That context matters enormously when you consider the landscape she has been watching unfold over the past several years. Since Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped back from their roles as senior royals in early 2020, Diana's name has become a recurring feature of their public narrative. It appeared in their bombshell interview with Oprah Winfrey. It surfaced throughout Harry's memoir, Spare, published in January 2023, in which he repeatedly framed his experiences through the prism of his mother's suffering. It echoed through the Netflix documentary series the couple released in late 2022, where Meghan was at times visually and thematically positioned alongside Diana in ways that were clearly intentional. The comparisons did not happen by accident. They were crafted, deliberate, and for many observers, deeply uncomfortable. The question being asked now, in quiet conversations among those who actually knew Diana, is whether this has gone too far. And according to sources familiar with Lady Sarah's thinking, the answer forming in Diana's eldest sister's mind is one that Harry may not have been prepared to hear. To be clear about what is known and what remains reported, Sarah McCorquodale has not given a formal press conference or published an open letter. That is not her style and almost certainly never will be. What has been reported, across sources with connections to the Spencer family circle, is that her patience with the ongoing use of Diana's image and legacy as a backdrop for Harry and Meghan's personal and professional reinvention has worn considerably thin. Those close to her suggest she finds the repeated comparisons between Meghan and Diana not merely simplistic, but in some ways disrespectful to who Diana actually was as a person, a woman whose complexity, humor, vulnerability, and resilience cannot be reduced to a convenient parallel for someone else's story. This is not a small distinction. When Sarah looks at the way Diana's memory has been deployed in recent years, she is not seeing a legend being honored. She is seeing a sister being used. And that difference, between honoring someone and using them, is one that only someone who truly knew Diana could fully articulate. The comparisons themselves deserve serious examination because they have been presented so frequently that many people now accept them as straightforward fact rather than contested interpretation. Supporters of Harry and Meghan have long pointed to genuine surface similarities. Both women married into the British royal family under enormous public scrutiny. Both faced intense and at times brutal media coverage. Both spoke openly about the personal toll that life inside the institution took on their mental health and sense of identity. These are real points of connection, and they are not fabricated. But Diana's family, particularly those who lived alongside her in the years before and during her marriage, carry a more complicated picture. Diana entered the royal family at 19 years old, utterly unprepared for what awaited her, With no public platform, no prior celebrity, no team of advisors, and no financial independence. She was, in the most literal sense, a young woman thrown into an institution she did not understand and largely left to navigate it alone. Her suffering was private before it became public. Her voice was suppressed before she found ways to make it heard. And when she finally did speak out, through the famous 1995 Panorama interview with journalist Martin Bashir, it came at enormous personal cost and without the safety net of an existing international profile. Meghan Markle arrived in the royal family as an accomplished, globally recognized actress with years of experience managing public attention, a pre-existing advocacy profile through her United Nations work, and a level of media sophistication that Diana never had access to. That is not a criticism of Meghan. It is simply an observation about context. And it is the kind of observation that someone like Sarah McCorquodale, who watched her sister cry in private long before the world knew there was anything to cry about, is perhaps uniquely positioned to make. What reportedly concerns those in Diana's immediate circle is not whether Meghan experienced real difficulties inside the royal institution. Many people believe she did, and those experiences deserve to be taken seriously on their own terms. The concern is about the framing. When Meghan's story is consistently told through the lens of Diana's tragedy, two things happen simultaneously. Diana's story gets flattened into a template, stripped of its unique and irreducible humanity. And Meghan's story loses its own independent power, forever positioned as a sequel rather than an original narrative. Neither woman is served well by that arrangement, but only one of them is no longer alive to object to it. It is worth pausing here to consider what Harry's relationship with the Spencer family has actually looked like over the years. By most accounts, it has been warm, particularly in the years immediately following Diana's death. The Spencers were a crucial emotional anchor for a grieving boy who had just lost his mother in the most shocking and public of circumstances. His uncle, Charles Spencer, delivered the extraordinary eulogy at Diana's funeral that still stands as one of the most remarkable pieces of oratory in modern British public life. His aunts, Sarah and Jane, maintained a presence in his world throughout his formative years. These were not distant relatives. They were people who loved Diana and, through that love, extended genuine care toward her sons. That makes the current reported tension all the more significant. Because if the people who once represented his most direct human connection to his mother are now reportedly questioning how her memory is being used, that is not something Harry can simply dismiss as palace politics or media hostility. It comes from a place he cannot easily characterize as enemy territory. The deeper issue, the one that makes Lady Sarah's reported perspective so potentially consequential, is about authority over memory itself. Who gets to define what Diana's life meant? Who gets to decide which comparisons are appropriate and which are reductive? The royal institution has its version. The British press has its version. Harry and Meghan have offered their version. Fans and supporters have constructed their own versions from a mixture of all of the above. But somewhere underneath all of those competing narratives sits the quieter, more personal truth held by the people who actually knew Diana Spencer before she was a princess, before she was an icon, and before she became the most powerful emotional symbol in the history of the British monarchy. Sarah McCorquodale is one of very few people still living who possesses that truth. She knew the girl who was nervous and self-conscious, who struggled with her sense of worth, who laughed genuinely and cried privately and carried a warmth that cameras could only partially capture. When she looks at how Diana's story is being filtered through the present moment, she is not comparing public images. She is comparing public images to a real person she loved and lost. That is a profoundly different experience, and it may explain why silence, which has served her for so long, has reportedly begun to feel less like discretion and more like complicity. For Harry, the implications of this shift are worth considering carefully. He has built much of his post-royal public identity on the foundation of his mother's story. The grief he carries is real and has been documented extensively in his own words. Nobody with any empathy disputes that losing Diana at the age of 12 left a wound that has never fully healed. But grief, however genuine, does not automatically confer sole ownership of a person's legacy. Diana belonged to her children. Yes, she also belonged to her siblings, her friends, and in a different but still meaningful way, to the millions of people whose lives she touched. The question of how her memory should be handled is therefore never going to have a simple answer. And the people who share that ownership most intimately may not always agree with one another. What appears to be happening now is that a long period of carefully maintained silence within Diana's family is giving way to something more complicated. Not a public war of words. Not a tabloid feud engineered for maximum damage. But a quiet, measured, deeply personal reckoning with how far the conversation about Diana's legacy has traveled from anything resembling the truth of her actual life. Lady Sarah McCorquodale spent decades building a reputation as someone who could be trusted to protect her sister's memory with dignity and restraint. She has not abandoned that reputation. But protection, as she apparently now sees it, may sometimes require speaking rather than staying silent. The world shaped so many stories around Diana while she was alive, and has continued doing so in the nearly 3 decades since her death. Perhaps it was inevitable that at some point, someone who was there before any of those stories began would feel compelled to gently, firmly, and with the full authority of lived experience, offer a different perspective. Harry, by all accounts, never saw it coming. That may be the most telling part of this entire story. In building a narrative that leaned so heavily on Diana's memory, he may have assumed that those who loved her most would either remain silent or offer quiet support. The possibility that they might view things differently, that loyalty to Diana's memory might actually lead somewhere unexpected, appears to have been left out of the calculation entirely. The royal story has never been short of voices, opinions, or interpretations. But every so often, a voice arrives that carries a different kind of weight. Not the weight of celebrity or institutional power, but the weight of genuine personal knowledge. Lady Sarah McCorquodale has earned that weight through decades of silence, service, and private grief. If she is now choosing to use it, even gently, even carefully, the conversation about Diana, Meghan, and Harry may be about to change in ways that none of the usual participants quite expected. And in a story that has already produced more surprises than anyone could have predicted, that may be the most significant development of all.